Good morning. After much operator error on my part, as Doug just pointed out to me, made me feel bad. Welcome to SafeDefend weekly Facebook Live. Doug, unfortunately, the topic we're going to talk about today is something that hits close to home for you guys. I know you guys had an incident up in your neck of the woods, and it's one that you're hearing more and more of. So let's just jump right into it.
Yeah, and unfortunately this week in Northeast Middle School in Kansas City, Missouri School District, there was a fight. The very limited information we have, again, these are juveniles, so they just released the name of the victim, but there was a fight in a bathroom and one of them got stabbed to death and was taken to the hospital and didn't survive. The second is being charged as a juvenile with all the serious crimes, so it's being handled. But it comes down to, what we had dealt with. I think it was Richfield, Minnesota, where there was a fight outside the school that ended up escalating into gunshots being fired, and kids were shot and killed up in that area. And then Arlington, Texas, we had another. That was the one where there was another fight that happened inside of a classroom and a gun was drawn. And the circumstances surrounding these are all varied and different. And it's not so much that we need to, deal with that. What we have to start looking at is how can we thwart these incidents from happening. So we have to focus on the sort of prevention versus sort of reaction model that we're currently in. And where we've seen this before is just this whole notion of community policing. Community policing came out, it was a big issue, started in the 80s and kind of really swept through in the 90s. And it was one of these things where we're getting our officers out of their cars on foot and start getting into the businesses, getting to the communities and start to say, hey, what's going on? What is happening out here? And these are the type of things that we're going to start to need our teachers to do it. The administrative by itself cannot pass enough policies and regulations and rules, and they cannot issue enough discipline to handle these incidents for us to just constantly react to them. At some point, the teachers have to start developing the relationships that we've lost, where people can tell a teacher in confidence, hey, there's a fight that's going to go on. Some kids are going to get off, all the kids supposedly are getting off at one bus stop because they're going to watch these two kids fight or whatever. Those are the type of things that aren't being reported to teachers on the same level. And then also social media is just so big and there's so many different platforms that we need the students to be out there informing teachers. And that's just where we seem to have lost that connection. And these type of things keep escalating and having issues at schools.
So in the latest situation in Casey area, this was a knife, I would assume, that the young man had with him, or a young woman. I don't know if it was a young man or a young woman.
It was two young men that were involved in the situation. It was a edged weapon that was used. I don't know what type of edged weapon, and I don't know how it got in the school. I don't know, I don't know the security level at the school. All of that was being asked. It was really just more of this idea, like, how can a fight occur in a bathroom that, from what we hear, and I'm trying to think of the other incident that we had the other incident recently was one where one kid shot and killed another one in the school. And that was a result of activity that was happening outside of the school. Again, it was a fight. And so what we know is that these things have a nexus to the school, because that's where all of the kids from the community come together to learn. And so if there's things that are happening outside of the school that could impact the safety within the school, that's where we've got to get better reporting systems in place. And the only way to do that is to convince those kids that might know something to report it. That's one of the very effective things that happened at Olathe East when they had that was reported by a student on the bus. So that student had a great rapport with that counselor, and that counselor was able to thwart something more horrific from happening.
So what are those? I mean, I know you've talked about community policing, things like that. What are some things some schools, from your perspective, could be doing that could help them get ahead of this?
So, and that's where, it's very difficult to do it, but it comes down to a personalization in that we've lost some of that time. Some of the stuff that's happened is that there's a dichotomy that goes on, and that is we don't want our teachers getting too close to the students, because the more rapport they develop with the students, all of a sudden it opens the door for horrific things to happen that are abuses by the teacher of those students. And so there's been a curtailing of the interaction that happens between teachers and students, because we're so worried about the student being victimized. But now all of a sudden we've gotten to the point where students and teachers don't communicate at all, and so it's gotten to the situation where nobody has enough trust in the teachers that if I report this, am I going to be, found out, or should I even bother reporting it? And those are the things that the students are dealing with, is that the students don't have those relationships that they need. So one of the biggest things that we can make sure that's going on is understanding, sort of paying attention to who the kids hang out with, so that if there's something that's going on with one kid that is in a certain group, you might be able to approach somebody else from that group and say, hey, what's going on with Johnny? Those are the type of relationships that when I talk to teachers, they're like, yeah, I used to know who was friends with who was dating who. I just stopped paying attention to all that because it just became one of those situations where some people think if you know too much about students, it becomes creepy. And so it's so hard for our teachers to navigate the waters of how to make sure they have good rapport with their kids, at the same time not feel that those kids are going to be victimized by them or anything like that. And so the best solution is that the administration has to start to talk to those teachers and dealing with what's appropriate, what's not, and make sure we have these conversations and not just ignore the problem.
What kind of trainings does SafeDefend have, or what kind of resources does SafeDefend have that could help in that area?
Well, we definitely have some stuff on the bullying, the cyberbullying. We do talk to teachers about grooming and inappropriate behaviors. Unfortunately, there's a fine line between a great teacher and someone that's grooming students. But the other stuff that we focus on is some mental de-escalation stuff. This was a lot of the stuff that that I was trained at when I was in law enforcement, where we would talk to these officers about how do you deal with somebody that's in mental health crisis, and what are the steps you need to take in order to handle that situation in the classroom. We have seen more and more, because of the way that courts have ruled, that kids with certain, mental capacities, limited capacities, are still being put into the classrooms, and then they're acting out, and the teachers aren't always able to handle those type of situations. And so that's one of the things we can talk about, is how to go through those through those situations. The biggest thing is, when we talk about this, is that one is modeling the behavior that you want from the child. So if a child is acting up in class and you go over and talk to them, don't stand over them all the time. Sometimes you need to squat down, or get down next to them, or take a seat next to them and talk to them. And so what you're trying to do is get down on that level and treat them as an equal. If it continues to escalate, you got to remove the audience. Ask the kids to head on down to the media center and give them something to do, or see if the kid is willing to go with you, go for a walk. Will you go for a walk with me? Don't say, let's go to the office. Just say, will you go for a walk with me? Because sometimes you can get a kid out into the hallway and just walk up and down the hallway and talk to them and find out what's going on, and explain to them, just so you know, this is inappropriate behavior because you're disrupting the classroom and I can't have that. And so you need to discuss those sort of things with them. Again, calmly talk to them, rationally, slowly. One of the biggest things to do that we tell teachers all the time is either put their hands behind their back or in their pockets, or fold them in front of them. But the more you gesticulate in front of kids, and the more you talk with your hands, the more agitated they're going to feel as they're being talked to. So one of the things they have to do, as a lot of teachers, they're used to pointing things out on the board. They're used to, making examples and using their hands to point things out. And that can be considered sort of aggressive by kids that are in crisis. Other stuff that's very important to do is, when you do come up with a resolution, make sure that you especially if that child agrees to be quiet and they do a good job, at the end of that class, make sure you go out and get them as they're leaving the classroom and thank them for good behavior. The next day, find a way to extend grace to them if it doesn't resolve properly, but see if they'll shake your hand, or at least tap, if they're on the desk, tap your hand on top of their hand while they're there. Give them some sort of contact that says, hey, I know you did a good job. And then more importantly, that grace needs to be extended over the next every week, every Monday. Make sure you make it a point. How are you doing? What's going on? Ask them to stay after class and just be social with them. Let them know that you understand they're in crisis. And then finally, make sure that there's help that they need, whether it's through the school or through the community that they're getting it. Yeah. And those are the type of trainings we offer that teachers can have, whether it's how do you recognize bullying and how do you handle it? How do you recognize cyberbullying? How do you handle it? Whether or not we have mental health training for our teachers, and then sort of crisis de-escalation stuff.
You're talking about taking a walk, and there's a gentleman who's now the athletic director in the community I live in, that I've watched him do that over the years. He was a coach and a teacher, and as I said, he's now the AD, but I've watched him numerous times. Some young person was having a meltdown, as I would say it, and he is the best I've ever seen at it. And he would literally do that. If you're up by a track, they would just walk around the track, and by the time he got to about a 200-meter mark, you see the body language changing on the young person. You could hear him laughing. He wasn't concerned about, there's always times to correct, right? But I think people forget one of the most important things you got to do is you got to de-escalate, and you got to get people to where they're just thinking clear. We've all been in those moments where you get emotional and you don't think clearly. You just don't. I mean, you react to everything. And, so I think that was a real pearl you just gave everybody. Just don't say, go to the office and let's just take a walk. Let's just take a walk, just calm down a little bit. Let's just go for a walk and talk. Now, my wife is a career educator. It's something I've always admired about her. And I've seen this through other teachers, obviously, as well, but is the ability to know where a child is in that moment, and we got to remember, these are kids. Adults, you got to remember where they are in the moment. So you darn sure probably need to do that for children. And, her ability to meet a child wherever they are at that very moment emotionally, I think that's one of the greatest skills that can be developed. I think some people, like all things, right? People say, is leadership natural or is it learned? I always say, I think it's both. There are those that have, more natural leadership abilities than others, but that doesn't mean they're going to be the best leader. If this person maybe is here and this person's here and this person works harder at it, they're going to move up. And so I think that's something that would be so beneficial to everybody, is just learn how the word that keeps coming back to me is conflict resolution, right? How to just deal with it, bring it down, get people to where we can think clearly and have a good conversation and turn it into a positive learning experience instead of something that escalates and gets out of control. And the sad thing is, I say this all the time. I find myself, I've turned into my father, I guess, but there's always been scuffles in the schoolyard, right?
Right.
And I'm not blaming anybody for this, but it just seems like there's much more violent scuffles in the schoolyard than there used to be. Maybe there's not. Maybe we just know about it more.
So the interesting thing on that is that the number of violent incidents with a weapon is on the increase, but the amount of bullying, the physical assaults using personal weapons, hands, fists, feet, that's going down actually. But then what's replacing that is the cyberbullying, right? It's because there's more anonymity in there. I want to jump back on something you said when we were talking about the walk. I love that story. That's exactly what we need. I want to caution teachers and administrators. If a teacher, let's say you have a 5th grade student who's acting up and the teacher needs to handle that situation, they need to call for help, right? They're going to need to deal with that. But if that administrator comes in the room, it's the teacher that should be taking that kid on the walk, not the administrator. The administrator should be watching the 20 kids in the classroom while the teacher can go handle it. And the 2 reasons for that are, 1, the administrator really doesn't know what's going on. They're just going to just try and calm the kid down and put him back in the classroom with no resolution. But 2, it's disempowering to that teacher. It's no different than wait until your father gets home, right? In other words, the teacher is basically abdicating their authority and saying, hey, I don't have any authority here. The administrator is who you have to really fear, where it's the teacher that needs to be empowered. So the teachers have to recognize this is their issue to deal with, because they're going to be the ones doing the follow-up. They're going to be the ones extending grace and telling the kid it's okay. You just expect better things in the future. And then the other thing I want to compliment mention that's so important is, regardless of the manner in which you do this, whether or not you have a personal diary, whether or not you have something, but the best way to probably do this is to either send the administrator an email or send yourself an email that documents what happened and what actions you took. So if you can't do that right there in the moment, let's say it's right at the end of class and you've handled it and now all of a sudden the next class is coming in, then send yourself an email that says Phil Nichols incident documentation, right? Like, you've done nothing other than establish the date and time of when it happened, and then you'll be able to go back and fill in those details. But it's very important you take 5 minutes after you leave that day to say, this is what happened, this is what we agreed upon, and this is what he's going to do, and so tomorrow I'm going to follow up or whatever. And then the second thing is, the last thing is, make sure you do follow up. If you tell a kid, hey, you did good, but I'm going to expect better behavior for you, then on Friday, if they go through a whole week with no issues, you better point out to that kid that you recognize they did a great job and that they don't have any more issues. Because failing to do that is showing the child that's acting out that there are no rewards for their good behavior, right? So we need to extend them that grace. And so those are the things teachers need to do. But those are just some of the small things that we do. We help teachers do that. It's really about follow through and follow up. And they're like, I have so much stuff I have to document. I can't really do this. And this is where it's so important that teachers start to utilize their time better. and I know it's hard, but like, every quarter, you have to do these evaluations on kids. You've pretty much, some of these kids, you already know how they're going to behave, especially your high performing kids. And so why not knock out that evaluation of that kid, those 2 or 3 sentences you have to write, knock that one out on the, one of the first weeks of class. Because chances are, if nothing changes, then you were accurate. If you do, then you just created a little bit of work to go back and change something.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden then, towards the end of the quarter, when you're now having to write these things up, you're able to spend more time and focus on those kids that actually do need some good documentation.
Yeah, I tell you, this is a topic that I know none of us wish was a topic that needed to be discussed, but I think there's good things out there that are available to assist and to help. And, in closing, I think I would, from my perspective, I'm gonna give you the last word here as we hop off, but, just communicate. I mean, it's about talking, it's about, if something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't, right? Right. I mean, the good Lord gave us instincts, and most times those things are accurate. So just say, as a parent, if you're concerned about something, make sure you're getting with the folks that you need to get with to try to get ahead of something. And if you're a child, we need them to get out and get a hold of an adult that can help them through that process. But Doug, what are your last thoughts?
Well, the 2 last thoughts. One is that we do see that truancy and tardiness and absenteeism are on the rise. A lot of this has to do with the mental health issues. It is definitely something that is expanding. I really would, encourage administrators and teachers to not just document the truancies, tardiness, and absenteeism, but to start asking the questions. What's going on? Why were you late today? And document the reason. And if it's I overslept, then calls need to start going home. Is this child really oversleeping or whatever? That's one of the biggest issues that's going on right now, is that these kids are in crisis and the parents don't always know it, or if they do know it, they're not handling it appropriately. And so one of the first signs of someone in crisis is an inability to maintain a schedule. And so that's so important that if students are doing it. And the other thing is that the old Henry Ford saying, and I'm going to go ahead and read it because I always get it wrong because of the way he spoke. If you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got, right? And so we've got to stop thinking that we can handle everything the way we've always done it. Things have to change. Our teachers need to make sure that they're handling their own problems and they're controlling their classroom and they're not giving that authority to somebody else. And our administrators need to start finding out why these kids are in crisis and start developing that rapport that alerts them when something's going on. I don't want to say that they're tattletales, but yes, we do want to raise a world of people that are willing to, quote, see something and say something. And if they're not willing to do that, then you have a problem in your school bigger than the violence that's happening. You have a breakdown in sort of communication and societal norms.
No doubt about it. Doug, as always, thank you so much. If you have any questions, if you've watched this after the fact, you've joined us today and you got questions, reach out to Doug. You can just contact him through email at info@safedefend.com. Doug, we appreciate you, brother. We'll talk to you soon.
Have a blessed Good Friday and happy Easter to everybody.
Happy Easter. Thank you.
Yep.